Forgiveness Redefined, a young woman's journey towards forgiving the apartheid assassin who brutally murdered her father, is a book written by forgiveness advocate and happiness activist Candice Mama. In the book, she candidly opens up about her dad, Glenack Mailo Mama, who was brutally murdered by a former Vlakplaas commander Eugene de Kock in 1992. She shares not only how she came to terms with her father's death, but also her struggles with anger, anxiety, sleepless nights, and bouts of severe depression as a teenager. Well, without giving much of the book away, let's now rope in Candice into this conversation to help us unpack this offering. Candice, a very good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Jeez, man, it's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you.
Wow, wow. Now, for the benefit of those who might not know what happened to you when you were younger, take us through what happened to you and how it all unfolded.
Absolutely. So when I was 9 months old, my father was severely murdered by an apartheid assassin by the name of Eugene de Kock.
Yeah.
And so I grew up, of course, without any knowledge of my father. I didn't know him. I didn't know of him. But when I was 9 years old, I discovered a book called Into the Heart of Darkness by Jack Poe. And in the book was a picture of my dad's burned body. And so for the first time, it really started to hit me. And so I went through life and I started getting very angry, very depressed. And as I continued through life, I got to around 16. And at 16, I had this feeling, and I thought in the middle of the night, and I thought I was having a heart attack. And so I went to the doctor and he said, you know, you weren't having a heart attack, but you were having a panic attack, and you've got such extreme ulcers for someone your age that you're actually going through depression. And I've never seen symptoms like this. And that is when I really realized that I need to either change my life or accept that I'm going to die. So I decided to change my life.
How did you change your life?
So it was actually using the tools of forgiveness. So that is what I speak about in the book. And it is about, you know, taking those steps to forgiving and letting go of the resentment you hold to someone who's got so much power over your life. And I think when we're angry at people, we hold resentment towards people. What we don't realize is we're giving them power over and over again. Every time you think of them, you're giving them that power over your life, right? And they're not affected by it, but guess who's affected? You are. So it takes me back to the quote by Nelson Mandela, anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to get hurt. So I came to that realization and I started taking the active steps towards forgiving Eugene. Granted,
when you don't forgive, I mean, you give the other people power over you, but then you know how difficult it is to forgive, eh? It is very, very difficult. And, you know, forgiveness is one thing, and then forgetting is a totally different dynamic altogether.
Absolutely. And I actually do not encourage people to forget. I think what we felt, you know, I actually cannot stand that phrase, forgive and forget, because I think it's so unreasonable. Like, trauma impacts us in such a deep way that forgetting is not an option. You know, it's a part of who you are. So what I teach people, what I try to help people to get to the understanding of is, you know, when you think back on that incident that has happened to you, that trauma, what I try and help you do is think back without having the emotional and visceral reaction to that trauma. So you can remember it without your body acting up. You can remember it without feeling this anger and resentment. You can remember it and let it build you up and say, you know what, that was supposed to destroy me, but it didn't. I'm so much stronger for it. I overcame that. And if I can overcome that, how much more can I overcome? So using it as an empowering tool instead of trying to forget it.
You know, when Nelson Mandela forgave, who the hell are we not to forgive? I mean, if Nelson Mandela did not forgive, would probably be in a totally different political position today. But this book isn't entirely about your father's death, but the aftermath thereof and what it did to your family.
Absolutely, and I try to really focus on that. I wanted to focus on the fact that when trauma or death occurs within a family, how it ripples through. It's like this thread that just unravels things in such a different way, in ways you wouldn't expect. And so that was my journey to how it unraveled my family, how it unraveled me, and how, if I had not come to a place of forgiving, how I would have completely self-destructed. And I hope that's the message that comes across in the book.
And just a couple of years ago, you finally met your father's killer, Eugene de Kock. I would imagine the trauma and, the reincarnation of the painful memories and the trauma associated with your father's death. What is going through your mind? What propelled you to take such a bold step?
Absolutely. So in 2014, the National Prosecuting Authority reached out to my family and they wanted to know if we'd be willing to sit down with Eugene. And immediately I said yes, because I'd already started taking the steps towards forgiveness. And I think for me, because I'd never actually thought this moment would come, it was one of those moments that took me aback, because I thought to myself, oh, I think I forgave this person, but when I sit face to face with this person, can I forgive them? And is this something I've actually done? So I went in with, trepidation and a form of anxiety in many ways of how am I going to react? I mean, this is the physical, in some ways I thought this is the physical embodiment of evil, or this, there's going to be this aura, there's going to be this thing around this person, and can I be in a room with someone like that? And so when the encounter did occur, so many of my own barriers and so many of my own preconceived notions actually broke down within that encounter, and
but then
I believe
deep
it
down,
changed
do you
me.
feel you've forgiven him?
150%.
Has
There's
your
no
family
doubt in my
forgiven him?
mind. Yes, my family has forgiven him.
Is he aware
Yes.
that it's been forgiven?
Absolutely. So when the encounter occurred, we spoke about what happened to my dad, and he did tell us in great detail what had happened to my father. And he had told us, that he had emptied out his magazine cartridge on my dad, and he doused them all in fuel, and then he set them alight. So we got all these really in-depth detail and perspective from his standpoint. And as the encounter unfolded, for me there was an important question I needed to ask him. And I asked him, Eugene, I want to say I forgive you, because my family at this point had said, I forgive you, Eugene, I forgive you. And when it got to me, I said, I want to say I forgive you, but I want to ask you one question.
Okay.
And he said, yes, anything, what is that? And I said, do you forgive yourself?
Yes.
And he looked around the room and he babbled on about something, and then he came back and he said, every time a family comes here, that's one question I hope they never ask me. And he said something else and he kept quiet. And I said, okay, but you haven't answered my question. Then he looked away and he dabbed the side of his eye. And he looked back at me and he said, when you've done the things I've done, how do you forgive yourself? And I broke down. And in that moment, it wasn't, I wasn't looking at the person who took away someone so important in my life. I saw two victims looking at each other and two people in pain looking at each other. So for me, I almost saw his humanity in that moment.
Gosh, Candice, we don't have much time. I wish we could go on and on.
Yeah.
But then how do we get hold of this masterpiece?
Absolutely. So exclusive books, Amazon, all leading bookstores in South Africa. And I do hope that people will enjoy the book.
All the best, Candice. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Great stuff. A big thank you there to our guest author, Candice Mama, for sharing details of her life she shares in her book, Forgiveness Redefined. Now, this is an absolute masterpiece, I must say. That's a young woman's journey towards forgiving the apartheid assassin who brutally murdered her father. Well, if you also belong to a book club or you're a lone reader, you can also join us for a Sunday morning book feature to talk about some of the books that you're currently reading or have read. Simply send us a detailed description of your book club on email, or you can also send us a picture of those books with a brief caption using our social media platforms. Use our handle at Morning Live SABC, hashtag Morning Live SABC. You can also tag or send us a Facebook message via our page, Morning Live SABC, and our email address is morninglive@sabc.co.za. Let's go for coffee now, shall we?